Welcome to episode 13 of the Woo and Science podcast. Today we have a special guest that's going to talk with us about movement is life. More when we get back.
Hey guys, welcome back. Dr. Meaghan Longyear and my lovely wife, Dr. Meaghan Longyear, for our Woo and Science podcast. Today we have a special guest that I'm going to bring on stage right now. And you guys may remember him as an intern in the past. He went away for a couple years, worked in Colorado, and now he'll be back joining the team full-time as a doctor. So we'll welcome Danny Reyes to the stage. Dr.
Hey
Danny
guys,
Reyes.
Dr. Dan. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be part of the team again and be able to embark on this journey with y'all. So wonderful topic we have today. Talking about movement is life. So very excited, very, very happy to talk about that.
Yeah, this is a big one for me. Like, I'm not going to go super deep into the explanation, but for me, being paralyzed and then being able to walk again, this is one that I've always like. Movement is life is one of my mantras. I do it a lot when I teach neuro and when we teach different classes with doctors and stuff like that. And I know, especially bringing you onto the team, it's going to be your focus, right, around athletics and movement and exercise and, and how it all affects the brain. But it's, I love this stat, and this is one that I'll throw out to the audience and let them think about it. How many steps are you supposed to walk a day according to neuroscience and brain science? And the answer I always get is like 3,000. And the reality is it's actually 12 miles. Now, in our society, in our world, we clearly don't have time to walk for 12 miles, right? But it's a little closer to 10,000 steps a day and not necessarily 3,000. So that 3,000 is a good start. It's good for cardiovascular, but we've got to break that up into even more in the reality. And that's where, I've always said chiropractic is huge, because when we adjust, we're imparting movement into the brain, right? The adjustment, the science behind it is had a huge shift in the last few years. And it used to be, we were removing bones off of nerves and things like that. But the science doesn't necessarily support that. But it does really support that when we adjust, when we use the, whether it's the clicker or whether we use our hands, we're imparting movement, and it activates areas like the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex. And we can prove that now with brain scan after brain scan. So that's why I really love this idea of movement is life. And then it even gets a little weird with Dr. Meg's stuff.
Just going to say,
we'll talk
those
about
emotions.
the messy emotions with, one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Walker, and I'm sure you'll talk around this, is, emotions are thoughts in motion. And so that adds a whole different aspect of physiology when you take that into account as well. So, I think there's a lot that can be said. And I know you and I have chatted a lot, Dan, about, movement and things and how important it is. And being in Colorado, right, you've had a chance to really move around some interesting places and do some different things with the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Growing up in Florida, the biggest mountain that you get to see is the onboarding ramp onto the 95. But like being out here, going on hikes, getting to go out and snowboard in the mountains. I mean, it's such a beautiful experience. And one of the things that I got to really appreciate with the polarity of these two areas is everybody here is very appreciative of nature, and it's given me this whole new perspective and whole new dynamic in regards to what movement really means, and being intentional with your movement and making time to go outside and go do those things is so important to the body and the mental health here. It's when you have those heavy winter days, and you guys know this in Michigan, right? Those heavy, heavy snow days, you're inside, it's depressing. You don't really want to do much of anything. You go back into those patterns of like, well, I'm going to scroll on my phone for hours, or I'm going to go for those bag of chips. But it's wonderful to see, like, when you're intentional with your movement, you go outside and you go adventure, you opt for that fruit cup or whatever that thing may be, and it allows you to make those better decisions and sets you up for success. So I've really gotten to appreciate that here. And then, I mean, it's such a sunny and wonderful state. You know, there's a park in every corner. You know, there's always people outside, people biking. It's just a wonderful place to be. So
I
yeah,
love
it's pretty fun.
I love the idea of that adventure, right? Like
Hmm.
that's movement to me. To me, and we talked about this and we'll talk more. Being intentional with movement is important. And being intentional with your thoughts as they move is important too. But I love the idea of adventure because that's where you have fun with it. Because workouts or exercise, right? I need you to go home and do this exercise can be um just daunting word, and it's one of those that carries a lot of negative connotations, and we'll self-sabotage around that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love the idea of that adventure though.
I love that you said that, like how the snow keeps you indoors and like depression rates
Keeps her
definitely.
indoors. She hates
Snow,
the cold.
hate the cold. Yeah. Joke that the stork was totally drunk when he flew me into Michigan and dropped me off in the middle of March during an ice storm. I should have been born in the Caribbean. But
Very fair.
learned a lot, a part of my experience. But the what you said though about that being stuck indoors, not being able to get out, not being able to move, and how that creates that depression. Then we doom scroll. We're just sitting there snacking or just doing things like that that we know bring us out of that, higher parts of our brain, bring us into that more limbic place, getting us stuck in those negative emotions because we can't move, we can't do stuff. So having like yes, get outside and move and stuff, but then those people that get into that place of I just don't want to get off the couch, and it turns into more of a pattern where they don't want to move, and then there's the depression and the sadness and all these heavy feelings because they're not moving. But then it's like you always talked
Yeah.
about with the couch to 5K. How do you get the person off the couch to go run the 5K? How do you get them to start embarking on doing these things that are healthier for them? And obviously when you're kind of trapped indoors, you're trapped indoors. But some of the things like you're talking about, getting out and hiking the mountains and stuff like that, like how do we get people to be able to get out, get moving so that they can reap those rewards and that brain health?
Absolutely. And one of the wonderful, I mean, beautiful things is when it comes to that goal of like, wanting to run that marathon or wanting to do that 5K or whatever that adventure is, it never really is about the finish line. It's never, and, I've run a couple of races in my life, and it's one of those things of I always can appreciate it at the end of it all. I'm like, man, the race was just an event, and I was already done before it started. It was everything that I did leading up to it, all the training, all the things that I got to experience with that. One of my one of my sending offs for chiropractic school was running the Ironman. Right, 8 hours of gruesome exercise to be able to get this big medal and my name on a T-shirt. While it was great, it was never about the race, like, yeah, it's like that's a hoorah, everybody's congratulating you, all of those things. But in the end of the day, it was the countless amount of hours that I spent swimming in a pool, or the countless bike rides that I was on the Silver Comet Trail in Atlanta. All of those conversations that I was having with people along the way were really what pushed me to be able to finish that race. So that whole idea of going out and exercising or doing this diet or doing this certain thing, it never really is about those. It's about exploring the possibilities and exploring the capabilities of our body to be able to further push us into this healthier mental state and emotional state, right? And
Right.
obviously physical state, right?
Have that piece too of like you're talking about the journey. So as
Yeah.
you're out there working out, as you're meeting people, you're accomplishing something. You're filling your cup up.
Hmm.
You're feeling good in that moment. You're driving, which you could get into all the neurons and all the things, but it keeps you going. You got started, you got moving. It was hard, it was gruesome as you said, but you kept going because there was that feeling of, accomplishment, of getting something, meeting
Absolutely.
people, connecting with people.
Well, and that's where the adventure really comes in to kind of bring that, right? And you guys journey, adventure, all of that. It's really about dopamine. And you get a dopamine hit, and that's going back to what you guys were talking about, doom scrolling and eating snacks and all of that. When you move, it drives your prefrontal cortex. It drives the cerebellum, which then drives the prefrontal cortex, which then runs your neurocircuitry. When you don't, you need dopamine to do that. And that's where we fall into those addictive behaviors. The dopamine hit that you get from the vertical scrolling on the screen, the dopamine hit you get from the handful of potato chips or the sugary snacks. It's all about then feeding your brain with dopamine, which then drives the left side of the brain, which doesn't allow you to see the big picture and realize everything's going to be okay. Right. And one of the things about, and I love that you brought up the Iron Man side of this, because one of the things that research they just showed, when you do something that's hard, that you don't necessarily want to do, it activates a different part of your brain. And guess where that part of the brain is? It's in the prefrontal cortex. It's actually in what's called the orbital frontal cortex. And when you activate and do something, fasting is another way to do this. When you look at food and you get really hungry and then you make the decision not to eat because of a goal that you have, it drives into that orbital frontal and it actually increases the size of the prefrontal cortex. And for those of you guys that wonder if that's important or not, take the other side of this. If you look at things like ADHD, depression, and Alzheimer's, it's actually when they measure the brains, there's atrophy in the prefrontal cortex. So this is a way that even in old age, you can grow your prefrontal cortex bigger and make it more resilient, right? We had talked about doing a podcast on resilience. This is how you build that resilience, by doing things that are hard, the journey. And the other side of it too, and Dan, I know you played soccer. When you talk to pro athletes, if we take this, or people who played sports for a long time, it's not the games they miss. It's the camaraderie with the other people. It's the guys you see on the Silver Comet Trail or at the park while you're walking. Even if it's just a head nod that guys do, or a wave, or, all of that stuff, it's that camaraderie. It's the seeing those people that are part of a common goal that really helps to drive that dopaminergic system too. So from a neuro perspective, I could nerd out on movement for days, right? And there's books written about it. If you look at Spark is a great book if you want to read on this, about what movement does to the brain. There's so many avenues that you can go after with this.
And you brought up two really good points. So one of them being, if we look at what happens when we don't have movement, or what happens in the brain when we're not doing those things that are hard, we see the kids who have the ADD and ADHD, they're the trouble children in class, quote unquote, right? They're the ones that they can't sit still. They want to be outside. And then, we go ahead and put those kids in the detention or whatever that is, put them in a room with solitude. And that's not necessarily what they need. They need to get outside. They need to adventure. And, or you look at, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you look at the elderly population. Typically, in my experience with my grandparents, part of why I'm into all the sciencey and all of these things is because I got to see it firsthand. Their body broke down so quickly because their brain broke down so quickly. It wasn't the other way around, getting to see that my grandpa, he was the kind of person that would wake up at 4 a.m, go mow the lawn, trim the hedges, prepare all the things outside. And then, once he started to get sick, everything broke down. Neurologically, he was going downhill very quickly. And then same thing with my grandma. She was very much the cook, and, very traditional household. And when she stopped cooking, man, it was all downhill. And it was a very sad thing to see, but it's a reminder that I got to live with, to say, hey, if I don't keep it up, if I don't do the things that push my body and my brain to be better, you don't really get better. You just, you start to lose it. So that's one of those things that I noticed.
Yeah. Those are things, it sounds like, that they enjoyed doing too. Like, you get up in the morning and it's like, all right, I'm going to go prepare meals for the day. All right, I'm going to go get the yard work done. I know my dad's this way. Like, he loves creating, beautiful masterpieces in his yard, having his grass, all of those things. So when they can't do those things, that sadness and that depression, really wreaks havoc on the brain and can spiral people down out of that prefrontal cortex, more into that limbic brain, that survival brain, rather quickly.
Well, and males definitely crave movement more, right? Again, if I can get nerdy for a second, males need movement, right? And if you look at the percentages of what, who has more ADHD growing up, it's definitely boys. And the reason for that is, little boys they have more testosterone. So you drive testosterone by moving and growing your muscles, right? So little boys need to move more. And when you sit them in that seat, like you were talking about, they don't have the ability to generate that movement, to use their muscles, and to generate more, because male brain is more dopaminergic. So they need to drive that into that system more. So, we've taken, in our environment for the most part with school, has gone the opposite way of where it really needs to go for neurodegeneration for kids. That's why I love John Medina in Brain Rules has a great quote. If you wanted to create something that was negative for the brain, decreased neuroplasticity, and inhibited neural growth, it would look something like the American classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And, I feel like that's a really powerful statement because it says a lot just in that. And so, when we look at that, you take that to the next step. Is there's research now that shows the ADHD brain grows up to be Parkinson's. And again, if you look at the numbers, who has more disorders of movement later in life? It's males. So males have the higher propensity to drive into Parkinson's, and females have the higher propensity to drive into things like Alzheimer's. So we often say that males develop disorders of movement and females develop disorders of thought. Now, for males, we need to go to a weight room or go throw weights around, or, go for that long run or that long bike ride. And for our females, it's a little different. This needs to move as much as their legs do. So we often say, females, they are verbal first. That's why the little girl calls the little boy a name, and she uses her first thing, right, by using her words. And then he hits her and gets in trouble for it because he uses his first thing, which is physical. And so we see that disconnect in little boys and little girls, and that carries later into life. So females, for their movement, really could be going for a walk, but with someone, because they need to talk out their problems. They need to use their verbalization. Their motion needs to be the words coming out of their mouths and solving all the world's problems, because that allows them to chew on it from a neurological perspective. So when we look at movement, it might look different for the male versus the female brain, and it might look different depending on where you're at in life, right? So, for little kids, their movement looks, and you see it in our office all the time, their movement looks vastly different than what I might have, somebody who's in their 20s, 30s, or 40s doing from a movement perspective.
Well, that's where it gets like with all the video games and stuff like that. And definitely it's boys that I see, that I know you do as well, that are playing more video games. So less movement, less getting out and going for that bike ride, going and getting, move your body. How many of these kids are actually going out and playing in the backyard and doing things and playing and being creative after sitting in a classroom all day. So, seeing a lot of these ADHD and ADD problems, it's just this terrible cycle that, how do you break it? Because it's, video games are fun and they want to play them. Their friends are playing them. But, it's also, what is it doing to your brain? And not just now, but long term, with all the stuff that you're talking about with Parkinson's and things like that. It's a very, very concerning thing. We need to move our body.
And so growing up, I grew up in the 90s, so video games were a thing, right? Like my cousins had their Nintendo 64s, their PlayStations, all of those things. And, it was, I got that little sweet spot where it was like, you'd go inside and on a really hot summer day in South Florida and you're playing your Xbox because you just can't go outside because it's too hot. But then the rest of the time that we can, we're out there. So there was a bit of that dynamic where we could handle both. And then now we're noticing nowadays, it's like, there isn't that, COVID, it showed us that when we weren't outside, how quiet the world can be. But then we had that influx of people wanting to go outside and wanting to adventure and really craving that. You really got to see the people that had that neuro resilience to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to stay inside anymore. And I want to go adventure and I want to go do those things. And there was an article that I was reading the other day ironically about Colorado, where it was talking about how Colorado is one of the most active states in the country. And post-COVID, there was a huge influx of people wanting to go outside and going to the national parks, and memberships were at an all-time high. But then as we've gone away from that, we've stepped right back into our reflexive patterns of, oh, I don't feel like going outside today. It's too hot. It's too wet. It's too this. It's too that. And being able to say, you know what, I feel like part of it is changing those words and changing the verbiage. Instead of saying it's wet outside, although it's wet outside, I'm going to make the best of it. And being able to change that mindset and shift those little words that we use, because I'm sure we all know words are very powerful. So
Mhm.
if we tell ourselves and give ourselves the ability to make that excuse, then we're just going to continue to push ourselves in that other direction of, well, I don't feel like going outside today. I'm going to play video games. I'm going to, go eat the snacks or doom scroll for 2 hours until I really feel like getting up,
Mhm.
which I know you're never going to, right? You're just going to continue to scroll. The, one other thing that I noticed, that I read the other day, and it was like the most beautiful thing. Social media is not social media, right? News media is not news media. It's become targeted media, and it really pushes us to stay on our phone. And, do we, I'm not going to conspire too much here, but do we think that
Hold on, I got to put
the
my
reason
tinfoil
for,
hat on. If we're gonna have this,
put our tinfoil hat on, but,
I love
um,
this conversation, but I got to put a foil hat on. It might be beaming some thoughts into my head.
yeah. So, do we think that that there's not a reason for the vertical scrolling with Instagram, or the horizontal scrolling with these dating apps, or the colors of the applications? I mean, they hired Dr. Mike, you know more about this. This is more up your wheelhouse, but what kind of psychologists and psychiatrists did they hire to be able to make these changes so that way, these people are addicted to their phones and addicted to this media? It never was social; it was targeted, right?
Yep.
Well, and again, I'll
Tinfoil hat
keep
on.
my tinfoil hat on for a second here. And there's definitely a concerted effort to keep you inside and keep you away from others, right? Because it's easier, again, it's just easier people to control if you're scared and you're not moving. But that's where movement can be really huge, is
Mhm.
in driving those areas to drive into your prefrontal cortex. And again, it's that right side. That right prefrontal cortex is the one that sees the big picture, realizes everything's going to be okay, and it sees, it realizes that this too shall pass, right? And I think that's a big part of where a lot of people weren't there for COVID because they were isolated. And that's why you saw, the numbers without movement, without being outside, without vitamin D, without all that stuff. You saw the mental health numbers go through the roof, in a bad way.
Yep.
You saw more alcohol abuse. You saw more cases of domestic violence. You saw more cases of depression and suicide. So just to put numbers into perspective, suicide rates in the US before COVID were right around 7%. During the height of COVID, they were at 21%. And they've settled back at around 12 to 13%. So they settled back almost twice what they were before. So what that tells me is we were really affected by that isolation long term, and we
Mhm.
still haven't unraveled that. So that's what lack of movement really does to the brain and does to your system. And if you don't have the ability to get out and do things and see others and socialize, because I think that was a big part of those numbers being what they were, there's just a lot of avenues that it negatively affects the brain and nervous system and puts you in really a tough spot to have resilience, to bounce back from whatever comes to you or through your environment, whatever stressors you have. Because the
That's huge.
brain naturally you're supposed to have difficulty. Like if you grow up with, all sunshine and rainbows, that's not good for your brain. You need to have things. That's
Challenges.
what builds your resilience, right? You can't sharpen a sword with a feather. You sharpen a sword with a stone. And so your brain is the same way. It needs to have adversity. It needs to have those things to build into that resilience, and movement, and especially moving through hard things is how you do that. And I love how you said, I'll go outside even in the rain, right? That's when the funnest stories happen, is when you went outside and it was raining and someone
Absolutely.
down, and or when it was just way too snowy and you never thought you were going to make it. Those are, if I look back at my childhood, the times I probably shouldn't have been outside are the ones that I repeat the stories over and over again, because I'm shocked I'm still alive from some of it, right? And I say that still alive tongue in cheek. But it's those things the hard things that you work through, and when you do things when you're not supposed to, that I think the most fun comes out of. So as we start to kind of wrap this, I love this idea of movement. I love the idea of adventure, right? Because I just think that
Mhm.
activates your brain, like the possibilities of where you can go, what you can do. But, you had said when we were talking about this the other day, that, your experience with telling patients, hey, just go for a walk, even though that's what Hippocrates said, right? There's a quote that is
Yes.
quoted to Hippocrates that says, and he's the father of medicine and health, right? It says, if you're in a bad mood, go for a walk. If you're still in a bad mood, go
Go for
for another
another walk.
walk. But right,
Yeah.
your experience, you said it really beautifully. And, if you tell people to go for a walk, that you haven't had great results with that.
Yeah, I mean, it it's it's a very hard thing because, you can say, go for a walk, go work out, go for, do this diet. And it's the negative connotation behind those things doesn't really allow us to want to do those. It doesn't enable us. So I've found that if I tell a patient, hey, go for a walk, and then write in your journal, 10 things that you noticed on your walk. They'll go for a walk and they'll write 15, 20 things, and they'll walk for miles. And they're like, oh, well, I was just going to go for a 10-minute walk. But then they're out there for 30 minutes writing about this beautiful scene with the duck on the pond, or, like how you guys have in the back of the office. We have the otters there, writing about the otters, and being able to write a story on paper. I'm sure you can elaborate, activates so many parts of the brain and does so many fun things for the body that allows us to be able to do that exercise without feeling like we're doing it. And I've even had some young athletes where it's like telling them, hey, just instead of going for a run or going for a walk, or, if you have a rough day at school, bring a soccer ball, bring a football with you, go dribble the basketball around, dribble a tennis ball. Doing things out additional to the walking and that adventure gives you another piece of that story to write. And kind of like you said, that whole adventure piece, we want to make sure that we do those things to allow us to be able to really enjoy that moment and be present in that moment.
I'm going to get a little weird with going off of what Danny
Of course
said
you're
here.
going to
I
get
got to
weird.
bring
And
a
it's
little
probably going to have some sort of emotional tie to it too,
It definitely has an
Absolutely.
emotional tie to it. But so interesting enough, there's been a lot of conversations in the office about this. So it brings in a lot of with the different chakras in our system, right? And that sacral.
we're getting really weird.
Yeah, we're getting weird today.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to bring it. This is getting all too brain stuff. Like I need to get a little woo. Got to keep the podcast name true to its name, right? So the sacral plexus is known all for that creation, right? Like the root chakra is all about safety and that creation. So like when we were talking earlier, Dan, you were, talking about like how to get people motivated, go do things hobbies that they enjoy, things that bring them joy or make them happy, walking, like you were just explaining, not being so much that. Well, when we get into that place of like, okay, here's something that I'm excited about, here's something I love to do, whether it's journaling, drawing, we're really activating those systems. So we're changing the energy in our body too, to get more excited. We're, and of course that affects all the way up to the brain, that, and the emotions and all that stuff. But if energy's stagnant in the body, if energy's not flowing like it's supposed to, we need to do things to fire into those areas. And that sacral plexus is all about creation. That's down in our belly button area where all of our reproductive system is. And so finding things that bring true passion to you, things that you enjoy doing that really light your fire, is a great way to incorporate into, like you're saying, go dribble the basketball around, or, go set up at the park and paint a picture. If you love to paint, express yourself, something that, really brings you happiness. And so that's changing, that limbic part of the brain, where if you're stuck in that place of like, well, I don't want to, and, like you said, changing the way that you talk about going out in the rain, or I don't want to do these things. Obviously, there's some emotional blockages there. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And we need to figure out what those things are so we can work through those, so that you can empower yourself to say no to the food that you're trying not to eat, or trying to, be able to get up and move and walk because you have a goal of running a 5K, whatever it may be. So really paying attention to that self-talk and the emotions that you have and you're feeling in those things, huge piece that, people need to pay attention to, and then seek out help, have people help you, or, do meditations and things like that to help you work through those blocks, so that you're not stuck there and you can achieve these awesome things and get your body moving.
And I think, the last little piece of that is break it up into chunks, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it seems daunting that I got to go for a walk for an hour, or I got to do an hour of exercise, that's not necessary. Move throughout your day. A lot of us have like these Fitbits or these Garmin watches, and every hour mine yells at me to get up and move if I don't move, right? So I think having those plans and taking it in little bits and pieces. If you don't want to go for a mile hike, that's fine. Every hour, go for a walk around the block, right? Or something shorter, but break it up into bits and make it, chunks that you can handle, especially with the meditations. I can't meditate for an hour, but I can meditate for 30 seconds and just be conscious of where I'm at and my breath, and that really focus, right? So, break it up into chunks, get outside and move, and tie it to something you love to do, right? And tie it to something visual. If you can be playing catch or working with a ball, that's even better. So hopefully those are some good tips for you guys. Thank you, Danny, for coming on. And I look forward
Thank you for having me.
to hear from that horrible state of Colorado. We're bringing you home,
Yay!
bringing you back to the sunshine and the beach.
Yes.
And we'll be ready to roll. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next
Absolutely. Thank you.